Christianity was a syncretic faith, absorbing and taking into itself many of the religious ideas of the Eastern Mediterranean world. From Judaism came the concept, unique to the ancient world, of monotheism, the belief in one God, together with the rich ethical and moral precepts of the Old Testament as well. From Orphism, a 6th century BCE religious formulary, Christianity asserted and believed that the body is the prison of the soul. From Hellenistic thought, Christianity derived the notion of the superiority of the spirit over matter. All these ideas played a part in the formation of Christian doctrine and in attracting people to it. While many elements of the Roman Empire disintegrated, the Christian church survived and grew. Scholars tell us that the earliest use of the word church, which in Greek is ekklesia, the earliest use of the word church in the New Testament appears in St. Paul's letter to the Christians of Thessalonica in northern Greece. Written about 51 CE, Paul meant by that term the local community of Christian believers. In later letters, however, he used the church to refer to the entire Mediterranean-wide assembly of Jesus' followers. After the legalization of Christianity by the Emperor Constantine in the 4th century CE, and the growth of institutional officers and officials, the word church was sometimes applied to those officials, not unlike when we refer to administrators in the university as the university itself. Fairly soon, the bishops of Rome, soon known as popes, from the Latin word papa, meaning father, claimed to speak and act as the source of unity for all Christians and claimed predominance in the life of the church. The popes claimed to be the successors of St. Peter, the first bishop of Rome, and heirs to his authority as chief among the apostles, and therefore head of the whole Christian church. They based this claim on the teachings of Jesus as recorded in Matthew 16, in which Jesus is said to have said, "You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the jaws of death shall not prevail against it. I will entrust to you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you declare bound on earth shall be bound in heaven. Whatever you declare in heaven shall be loosed in heaven." Christianity had a dynamic missionary policy, and the church slowly succeeded in assimilating, that is, adopting pagan peoples, both Germans and Romans, to Christian teachings. Moreover, the church possessed able administrators and highly literate creative thinkers. These factors help explain the survival and growth of the Christian church in the face of repeated Germanic invasions and the internal collapse of the Roman Empire. For instance, Bishop Ambrose was a trained lawyer, the son of the Roman prefect of the Gauls, which is present-day France, and governor of that province. He's typical of those Roman aristocrats who held high public office, converted to Christianity, and subsequently became bishops. As Bishop of Milan, Ambrose himself exercised spiritual responsibility in the church and governmental authority as well. During the reign of Diocletian, 284 through 305 CE, the Roman Empire had been divided for administrative purposes into geographical units called dioceses. Gradually, the church made use of this organizational structure. Christian bishops, leaders of the early Christian community, were elected by the Christian people, established their headquarters or sees in the urban centers of the old Roman dioceses. Thus, church leaders kept capitalized on the Roman imperial organization, its structure, and adapted it to ecclesiastical purposes. The important activity, one of the most important activities of the church, was missionary activity. Now, the word Catholic is derived from a Greek word meaning general, universal, or worldwide. Christ, concerned that his teachings were for all people, instructed his followers to take the message to the rest of the world, and Christians sought to make the Mediterranean world Catholic, that is, converting believers everywhere. Paul urged Christians to bring the good news of Christ to all peoples. The Mediterranean therefore became the highway over which Christianity spread to the cities of the empire. In Christian theology, conversion involves turning toward God. I mean, that's pretty much what it means. That is, according to the gospel message, a conscious effort to live for Jesus. Missionaries of the church and priests got masses of pagans and illiterate people to understand and accept Christian ideals and teachings through three things: preaching, assimilation, and the penitential system. Preaching is still around. It is aimed at instruction and edification. Instruction conveys the basic teachings of Christianity. Edification strengthened the new baptized in their faith through stories about the life of Christ and the saints. However, Christian missionaries often pursued a policy of assimilation as well, enhancing the conversion of pagan men and women by stressing similarities between their customs and beliefs and those of Christianity. In 601 CE, Pope Gregory wrote to Augustine of Canterbury, expressing his desire that pagan buildings and practices be given Christian significance, not destroyed. He wrote, "I have come to the conclusion that the temples of the idols among the people should in no account be destroyed. The idols are to be destroyed, of course, but the temples themselves are to be dispersed within the holy water." He wrote, "I've come to the conclusion that the peoples of the idols." He wrote, "I've come to the conclusion that the temples of the idols among those people should in no account be destroyed. The idols are to be destroyed, of course, but the temples themselves are to be aspersed with holy water, altars set up in them, and relics deposited there. For these temples are well built, they must be purified from the worship of the demons and dedicated to the service of the true God. In this way, we hope that the people, seeing that this temple are not destroyed, their temples are not destroyed, may abandon their error, and flocking more readily to the accustomed resorts, may come to know and adore the true God." A prime example of how assimilation worked was the transformation of Valentine's Day. Two Romans named Valentine, Christian priests, were both martyred for their beliefs around the middle of February during one year in the 3rd century. Since about 150 BCE, the Romans had celebrated the festival of Since about 150 BCE, the Romans had celebrated the festival of Lupercalia in mid-February to purify the city and ward off evil spirits in time for the Roman New Year and the arrival of spring. Ever the clever church converted the old festival of Lupercalia into St. Valentine's Day. At that time, it had nothing to do with lovers or the exchange of messages and gifts. That practice began later in the Middle Ages. The 14th of February was still celebrated as a public festival, but it had been assigned and taken on a Christian meaning. Penance, in practice, had a powerful impact on the conversion of pagan masses. This is the rite of reconciliation or penitence, in which a sinner reveals his or her sins in order to receive God's forgiveness. In the early church, confession meant that the sinner publicly acknowledged charges laid against him or her and publicly carried out penitential works prescribed by the bishop or priest. For example, an adulterer might have to stand outside the church before services wearing a sign naming his or her sin or sentence in asking the prayers of anyone who entered the church. Beginning in the late 6th century, however, Irish and English missionaries brought the more private penitential system to continental Europe. Penitentials were manuals for the examination of the conscience. The penitent knelt before the priest and then the priest would question the penitent about the sins he or she may have committed. Then a penance was imposed. It usually meant fasting for a period of time on bread and water, which was intended as a medicine for the soul. The penitential system is much more akin to Jewish law of the Old Testament than the spirit of the New Testament. The penitential system also revealed the ecclesiastical foundations of the church's service attitudes. The penitential system also revealed the ecclesiastical foundations of the church's severe attitudes towards sex, birth control, and adoption. The penitential system also revealed the ecclesiastical foundations of the church's severe attitudes towards sex, birth control, and abortion. Probably the most important and major dilemma the early Christian church faced concerned Greco-Roman culture. The Roman Empire, as a social, political, and economic force, was gradually disintegrating. Its culture, however, survived. In Greek philosophy, art, and architecture, in Roman law, literature, education, and engineering. The legacy of a great civilization continued. Christianity had begun and spread within this intellectual and physiological and psychological milieu. Oddly enough, Christians in the 1st and 2nd centuries believed that the end of the world was near. Christ had promised to return, and Christians expected to witness that. Therefore, they considered knowledge useless and learning a waste of time. The important duty of Christians was to prepare themselves and the world around them for the second coming of the Lord. Good Christians who sought the kingdom of heaven through the imitation of Christ believed they had to disassociate themselves from the filth that Roman culture embodied. As St. Paul wrote, "The wisdom of the world is foolishness. We preach Christ crucified." Tertullian, who lived from 160 to about 210, our friend and influential African church father and writer, condemned all secular literature as foolishness in the eyes of God. He called the Greek philosophers, such as Aristotle, hucksters of eloquence, and compared them to the animals of self-glorification. "What has Athens to do with Jerusalem?" he thundered. "We have no need for curiosity since Jesus Christ, nor inquiry since the gospel." Tertullian insisted that Christians would find in the Bible, all the wisdom they needed. Gradually, however, Christians began to come to the conclusion that while Christ may be going to return, his return would probably be delayed, and they had to make some kind of adjustment so as to live in the culture of the Roman world. And when they looked at the scriptures, they found some text clearly urging Christians to accept the existing social, economic, and political establishment. In the first letter of Peter, the writer wrote about the obligations of Christians toward pagans. He said, "Always behave honorably among pagans, and toward civil authority, for the sake of the Lord and the authority of every social institution, the emperor as the supreme authority, and the governors as commissioned by him to punish criminals and praise good citizenship." Paul himself believed that there was a good deal of truth in pagan thought as long as it was correctly interpreted and understood. The result was a compromise. Christians gradually came to terms with Greco-Roman culture. The church's attitude toward women and toward homosexuality illustrate the way early Christians adopted the views of their contemporary world. They accepted them. They were a part of their thought processes and intellectual development. Jesus considered women equal to men in his plan of salvation. He attributed no disreputable qualities to women, made no comment on the wiles of women, and made no reference to them as inferior creatures. On the contrary, women were among his earliest and most faithful converts. He discussed his mission with them in John chapter 4. He accepted the ministrations of a Reformed prostitute. And women were the first persons to whom he revealed himself after his resurrection, as told in Matthew 28. Unfortunately, Jewish and Christian writers were not Jesus, and they had a different attitude toward women, and unfortunately had a greater influence on the formation of medieval and modern attitudes toward women. Jesus' message emphasized the love for God and one's fellow human beings. Later writers tended to stress Christianity as a religion of renunciation and asceticism. Their views derived from the Platonic, Hellenistic ideas of the contemporary Mediterranean world. The Hellenistic Jewish philosopher Philo of Alexandria, who lived from 20 BCE to 50 CE, he held that since the female represented sense perception and men the higher rational soul, females were inferior to the male. Female beauty may come from God, who created everything, the African church father Tertullian believed, but that beauty should be feared. Women should wear veils, or men will be endangered by the sight of them. But yet, perhaps the most revolting image of women in this period come from St. John Chrysostom. Yet perhaps the most revealing image of women in this period comes from St. John Chrysostom, 347 through 407 CE. He was the Patriarch of Constantinople and was a ruthless critic of contemporary morals. Commenting on female beauty, he wrote that if a man considered what is stored up inside those beautiful eyes and straight nose and the mouth and the cheeks, you will affirm the well-shaped body to be nothing else than a white sepulchre, the grave. The parts within are full of so much uncleanliness. Church fathers acknowledged that God established marriage for the generation of children, but they believed it was a concession to weak souls who could not countenance celibacy. God had clearly sanctioned marriage, and therefore it was theoretically good, as it was created by God. But in daily life, every act of intercourse was evil. The child was conceived by a sinful act and came into the world trained with original sin. Celibacy was the highest good, intercourse little more than animal lust. The church fathers regarded sex at best as something to be tolerated an evil whose only good was procreation. Perhaps until very recently, this attitude dominated Western thinking on human sexuality. Toward homosexuality, Christians of the first 3 or 4 centuries simply accepted the attitude of the world in which they lived. Like the Greeks, many Romans indulged in homosexual activity, and contemporaries did not consider such behavior or inclinations toward it immoral, bizarre, or harmful. Several emperors were openly homosexual, and homosexuals participated freely in all aspects of Roman life and culture. Early Christians, too, considered homosexuality a conventional expression of physical desire, and though some Christians and some pagans were homophobic, some prominent Christians experienced loving same-gender relationships that probably had a sexual element.